Hi, welcome to Africa in Perspective. My name is Nelda. In today's video, we're going to be talking about the abolition of the slave trade. So I was on Instagram and I was just scrolling away like one does on a weekend. And I came across this video of this guy called Konstantin Kisin. He's a satirist and he uses like humor, irony to comment usually about politics. And he was talking about how the reason the slave trade was abolished was because of the British. And I have a few points that I want to make because I disagree. I don't think the abolition of the slave trade is something that needs to be credited to the British or British benevolence. Instead, I think it's something that needs to be credited to the people who were being enslaved and were actually fighting against the slave trade. Now, when you think about slavery, a lot of people will typically say, oh yeah, the Europeans enslaved people. But slavery is something that has been going on for years, guys. The OG, the earliest record of slavery was 3,000 years before Christ. That means, right now we're in 2025, which is 5,000 years after Christ. And so that means 5,000 years ago is when people started trading each other as goods and products. And the earliest records were in ancient Egypt and Mesopotamia. Now, Mesopotamia is present-day Iraq, a little bit of Turkey, a little bit of Syria, a little bit of Kuwait. It was a wide range of countries were covered. Now, in the Bible as well, or in the Quran, if you're Muslim, you know the story of Joseph/Yusuf. He was sold as a slave by his brothers. So that was around 1700 to 1800 before Christ. So this was something that was going on for a very long time. And something that a lot of people typically say is, well, everybody has traded slaves before, which is true. Yeah. Africans traded slaves, Europeans traded slaves, Asians, the Americans, not present day Americans, but like OG North Americans, Native Americans, and OG South Americans, they all traded slaves. However, Nevertheless, guys, when people are talking about slavery and slave trade, typically they will talk about the transatlantic slave trade because it was the GOAT, it was the final boss of slavery because of its scale, because of its permanence, and also its global legacy. Now, the transatlantic slave trade traded 12 million Africans. 12 million Africans. And out of those 12 million that were taken, 3 million of them were because of the British, which is, we're going to talk about this later, but the idea of crediting the British to the abolition of the slave trade is actually crazy work because during the 18th century, they were at the top of the hierarchy. They were the highest when it comes to the numbers of people they were shipping out of the continent. So you can't sit here and trying to convince me because they were a key player in the transatlantic slave trade, which again was known for what was called the chattel slavery kind. Basically, what happened is in other kinds of slaveries, particularly the ones that were conducted in countries like Korea, for example, it was Koreans enslaving Koreans. It had nothing to do with race. It was something to do with class and a few other factors. But the kind of slavery that the British and the Germans and the Italians and the French were doing in Africa, shipping away our people, had a lot to do with race. It was also considered to be hereditary in the sense that if you bought a slave, their children would be slaves, their children's children. We were considered as property that could be traded. Now, there was not only that, there was a lot of brutality, there was extreme violence, there was a lot of genocide. Nama and Herero genocide, for example, that is in present-day Namibia, conducted by, take a wild guess, the Germans. 80% of the Herero people were wiped out. 50% of the Nama people wiped out. There was a massive massacre of people in the DRC by the one and only King Leopold II. Some people, guys, don't come attack me in the comment section. Don't call me, I'm not going to say the name. But some people have said that King Leopold II killed more people than a certain man from Germany killed certain people from somewhere in the world. I'm not going to mention names. Anyways, there was also a lot of forced labor because people were being forced to work in plantations they didn't want to work. They were being shipped away from their home. There was a lot of land seizures. There was a lot of dehumanization. I talked about this in one of my previous videos where scientists were talking about how the skull of an African man looks closer to the skull of a chimpanzee. Therefore, African people are chimpanzees. We were being dehumanized. So there was a lot of that. And this slave trade began around the 1500s. It peaked around the 1700s. And then it ended towards the 1800s. And of course, Britain is always getting the credit because they outlawed it in 1807. And then they officially outlawed slavery as a concept in 1833. They had to pay people to convince them to let go of slaves, And then the US abolished the slave trade in 1808, which is a year after Britain, and then they officially ended. I'm sorry. I'm using a lot of air quotes because I'm being very salty, but it's true. It's true, guys. They ended the slave trade in 1865. We're not going to talk about Jim Crow and all the things that Black Americans experienced after slave trade ended. The slave trade ended. Okay, we're not going to talk about it today, are we? Okay, now the way it ended, people typically say that Britain was the main person that was playing a role here. But like I was saying, It's kind of stupid to say that, and sorry for using such harsh language. Actually, I'm not sorry because I think it is stupid. Britain, sure, it played a role. They had naval patrols that were intercepting slave ships. They were sending their people to go and talk with other nations on how to stop and abolish the slave trade. Basically, they did a lot of convincing. And there was this guy, his name was William Wilberforce, who everybody and their moms will say, oh my God, if it wasn't for William Wilberforce, the slave trade would have potentially still be going on. And of course, he played a role. He was a member of parliament. He was responsible for the Slave Trade Act of 1807. And one of the reasons is he converted to become an evangelical Christian in the 1780s. And he decided to use his political power to align with his Christian convictions. Some people would argue that Christianity was promoting slavery, but I don't know which Bible you guys are reading. We're going to talk about this in another video. Now, my issue with crediting William Wilberforce and his friends in Britain is because, one, like I said, it's kind of fake for Britain to say, oh my gosh, we're the ones who abolished the slave trade. While in the 18th century, they were the peak of the slave trade. They were the highest grossing is a very weird term, Nelda, but they were the goats, they were the final bosses of the slave trade. So it's like, because I'm the queen of analogies, at least how I'm thinking about it, yeah? It's as if I walk into a kitchen with a bucket of food, and then I pour the food everywhere in the kitchen, and then I'm like, oh, I need to clean it. And then I go clean it up, and then I go complain to my flatmates, like, oh my gosh, if it wasn't for me, the kitchen would not have been cleaned today. You're the one who threw the trash in the kitchen anyways. So it's the same thing. They were benefiting from slavery, and then when it was no longer profitable, they decided to go ahead and abolish it and take the credit. Now that is where my point is coming at. Why was it no longer profitable? Because people were resisting. It became so expensive to take care of colonies because people were resisting, and it was hard to maintain this resistance because they had to use weapons, they had to employ their military, they had to use real money to actually go ahead and support the fight against these resistances. And there were so many. There was the Haitian Revolution, for example, in Haiti. We don't talk a lot about the diaspora here, but something I'm working on, and we are going to be talking about them. But there was Ashantis in present-day Ghana, Bunyoro resistance in Uganda, the Zulu from South Africa, the Angolan resistance. There was the Herero and Nama, like I said, they're in present-day Namibia. The Dahomey Kingdom was present-day Benin. These are just a few of them that happened to facilitate the abolition of the slave trade. Now, there was even more, even after slavery was quote-unquote gone. Colonization as a concept, still being settlers in other people's countries where you were never invited in the first place. That also had a lot of resistance from, for example, the Tanzanian, present-day Tanzania, Majimaji War, fought between 1905 and 1907. The Italo-Ethiopian Wars. People say, Italy never colonized Ethiopia. I have my own personal opinions about that. Don't attack me in the comment section. I'll clarify them in a different video. If you want to find out, subscribe. Yes, Ethiopians were fighting so hard against the Italians. The Mau Mau rebellion in Kenya, the Algerian War of Independence as well, the Masawas, I'm so sure I pronounced it correctly this time. The Sanusi, the Libyans were fighting against Italians, the Bokassa rebellion in Central African Republic. These are just a few. People were fighting against this colonial rule. People were fighting against slavery. And you're sitting there and telling me, oh my gosh, the British gave these people a gift. No, they didn't. People were fighting. And the reason I'm talking about this, and the reason I'm even deciding to respond to this video from Konstantin Kisin, which I will link down below, by the way, is I want Africans to remember exactly what we were able to achieve. If we were able to fight against slavery at that time, we were able to fight against colonization and to gain, it's not full independence because there's still neocolonialism, and that's something that I want to talk about as well. The fact that we were able to fight them at that time means we have the capacity in ourselves to also fight. We have that spirit in ourselves to fight. And neocolonialism absolutely angers me because even though these people are no longer settlers in most of our countries, they still, the channels that they set during colonization still exist. They're still extracting resources at very, very cheap prices. They're still taking advantage of us through debt trap diplomacy. Like they're giving us debt when they know we can't repay it. And our leaders, who are very, very responsible, most of them, not all of them, are still going to beg for this money. No, we can't repay it. And now we're trapped trying to repay money by our own resources, and our people are never developing. We are in a constant cycle of debt, and we are going to be stuck forever if we're not careful. But what I'm trying to say is, let's not forget that the reason the slave trade has ended is because we fought. Not because the British woke up one day, put down their cups of tea, and were like, you know what would be nice today? We're going to end slavery in it. No, we fought. That's why it stopped. And I'm so sure that if we never fought, if we just gave up and were like, you know what, guys, we're slaves for life, we would have been slaves for life. Hey, for life. Sorry, for life. And I think I generally believe that because Britain still has colonies to this day. They do. Don't they have like 14 territories? Yeah, that's what I'm talking about. To this day, they're countries, sovereign nations like Canada, Australia, New Zealand. They don't have like their own presidents. The highest level is a prime minister because they still owe their allegiance to Mr. Man in the UK. That's all I'm gonna say about that today. But that's why I'm making this video. Like, let us remember exactly who we are. Our ancestors fought. People died. Mandela went to prison. Okay, our leaders were assassinated because we're fighting for independence. And I know it's scary. Life is sweet, but guys, if we don't fight today, our kids will live lives that are exactly as terrible as ours or even worse. So let us remember exactly what we're able to achieve. Don't let anybody try to convince you that this was something that we didn't fight for. We fought for it, and that is why slavery and the slave trade ended as a concept. So thank you so much for watching. Very short video. Hope it was helpful, and let me know what I missed. Let me know what you'd like to see in the future, and you will see me in the next video. Bye.